Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Ayşe Süberker. For decades, Turkey has been battling the PKK terror group both at home and its strongholds across northern Iraq. Ankara has launched several operations since 2020 and has waged that fight largely alone. That could be about the change after Turkiye and Iraq saw a major breakthrough in security cooperation. The neighbours recently announced they would open 2 military centres in Iraq. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan and his Iraqi counterpart were present for the agreement signing, which they called historic. The top diplomats said they plan to take cooperation to the next level by setting up joint coordination and training centers in Baghdad and Bashika. While the main priority is to combat terrorism, the two countries also expect to disrupt organized crime networks. Last month, the Iraqi government issued a directive for its state institutions to refer to the PKK as a banned organization. As part of its increased border control measures, Turkish security forces have neutralized more than 800 terrorists in Iraq since January. And for more on the security deal between Ankara and Baghdad, joining me now from London is Afzal Ashraf. He is a visiting fellow at the Center for Conflict, Security and Terrorism. And from Islamabad, Hamza Rifat. He's a political analyst. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. So, Afzal, let me begin with you. What do you make of this memorandum of understanding on military security and counterterrorism cooperation between Turkey and Iraq that was signed last week?
Well, overall, I think it's a very positive development. It comes as if you like, the capping stone of a series of MOUs and other understandings that have been taking place between Iraq and Turkey over the last several months, beginning this year with a visit by the president of Turkey to Iraq, a visit after 13 years. So this isn't a discrete event. It's the culmination of a lot of diplomatic and security activity. And I think if applied with sincerity and with some level of nuance, it will achieve a huge amount of security and trade improvement, economic improvement between the two countries.
So, Hamza, what do you think? Does this deal face any challenges moving forward?
The primary challenge would be alpha elements or terrorist groups, which have jeopardized security, military, and economic cooperation between Iraq and Turkey. You would recall that in 2017, when the Peshmerga terrorists were actually attacked by Turkey, Iraq claimed that, this was a violation of state sovereignty. So I think spoilers would have a huge role to play as far as jeopardizing this agreement is concerned. And if this agreement is to, materialize, as the previous speaker rightly pointed out, it's important that, it is actually taken forward not only through state-sponsored ownership, but also towards making sure that it has a trickle-down effect on the local population as well. So I think that the PKK, the YPG, as well as terrorist organizations which are operating within Iraq will seek to try and jeopardize this particular agreement, which has come after quite some time. And it's also important to understand that this comes straight after the Iraqi Security Council designated the PKK as a terrorist group as well. So how would these alpha elements respond to enhanced counterterrorism cooperation between Iraq and Turkey? That's going to be a huge question.
So, Afzal, the Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said the agreement had historic importance, while his Iraqi counterpart Hussein said it was the first time in the history of Iraq and Turkey in this field. Could you elaborate on this? I mean, what does this deal entail and why it is so unprecedented?
Well, it's unprecedented partly because of the reasons explained by the previous speaker. There are terrorist groups operating, but also because the imperative and indeed the opportunities available for this deal have occurred because of global changes in the role of power. To a very large extent, until recently, the last 2 or 3 years, the US has dominated politics in the region. Increasingly, countries are recognizing that the United States it doesn't hold the hegemony that it once did, and that deals are being done, peace and stability deals are being done on a bilateral basis with sometimes external help, as was the case between Iran and Saudi Arabia, brokered to some extent by China. So there is a realization that you have to take your own security and your own economic development within your own hands. The role of the spoilers, as was mentioned, has to a large extent diminished for a number of reasons. In the case of the Kurdish parties within Iraq, the PUK, the KDP, both recognize, certainly the KDP recognizes, I think, the importance of economic development and the importance of cooperation with Turkey, which it has done for several months, several years rather. And so there are areas where the deal builds on changes, one of which, of course, is the location of the training center, which was used initially, that location or that region was used initially to fight the war against ISIS. So it builds on a number of environmental conditions, a number of changes that have taken place, which have made it appear a mutually beneficial move forward.
So, Hamza, does this deal have any relation to Iraqi calls for the United States to withdraw its troops from the country?
To a large extent, yes. I think the domestic political environment in Iraq is that of extreme anti-American sentiment, which has been brewing for quite some time. Because obviously in the post-9/11 environment, you haven't really been able to see the American presence have a tangible impact on the local population. You've had alpha elements increase in number exponentially as well. Iraq has some serious security quagmires, and many terrorist groups are actually using Iraqi soil to export terror, especially to Turkey as well. So there is a sentiment within Iraq, and especially after what's been happening with the genocide in Gaza, that there needs to be the strategic shift towards regionalism and bilateral cooperation, as well as multilateral cooperation within regional frameworks. Because obviously the American experimentation has not necessarily yielded the dividends which are actually required by the Iraqi leadership as far as, you could say, a safe, secure, and prosperous Iraq is concerned. With this agreement, Iraq would be able to share intelligence with Turkey as well, and it would actually bridge these trust deficits which have simmered for a very long period of time with regard to terrorist attacks, whether it's taking place in Turkey or whether it's taking place in Iraq. So it's extremely important to understand that in the post-9/11 environment, the Iraqi leadership, especially with the Shia clerics as well, who have a huge role to play as far as policymaking is concerned, they believe that a bilateral, multilateral, and regional framework for counterterrorism is extremely important as compared to bilateral engagement, which has had the decades of bilateral engagement with the United States.
So, Afzal, one of the training centers will be in Bashika. Talk to us about the significance of Bashika and why is this region important for Turkey?
Well, as I mentioned briefly in my last answer, it's located in a region that was near Mosul, that was used to fight against ISIS. A lot of training and development was already taking place there, mainly of the local security forces. And it is, if you like, the area from which any security forces, usually local people, local forces, will have to react if the PKK or any other terrorist organization chooses to use the Iraqi border regions for deploying attacks against Turkey, or indeed for attacks against Iraq. Now, one of the things that I don't think it's pretty obvious to a lot of people is that Turkey holds the Center of Excellence for the Defense Against Terrorism, which is a NATO Center of Excellence in Ankara. So Turkey has, over a period of almost 2 decades, built up a degree of expertise in the counterterrorism fight. It is, if you like, the home of the Center of Excellence and Expertise for NATO. And so that provides Iraq with a powerful capability, which can be deployed not just in the northern region, but across the country, hopefully contributing to a great deal more security within Iraq. Of course, ISIS still operates in Iraq to some degree. So it has benefits beyond the mutual, if you like, concerns that Iraq and Turkey share around the border region. So that location has a degree of significance. The control center, of course.
And also, I think it's proximity to a very large oil block, right?
Well, that is, yes, that is a factor. But oil in Iraq is spread in different regions. In the south, there's oil. There's in Kirkuk, there's a lot of oil. So I wouldn't place too much emphasis on that particular aspect. The coordination center is going to be in Baghdad.
So, Hamza, how do you think Iran will review this agreement? And does this agreement tell us that the two countries have moved past their differences in the fight against terrorism?
Well, it's very complicated because you see, after the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, there's a strategic thinking in Iran that, proxy warfare needs to be deployed to try and make sure that they can attack Israel. And you could say that, with the Houthi rebels in the Gulf of Aden actually hijacking container ships, they would actually view Iraq as a pretty strong, you could say, a front to try and make sure that they can tackle Israel. But for that matter, I think Iran would view this with cautious optimism. Obviously, they're extremely, you could say, skeptical about U.S. involvement in the Middle East. They would look forward to the prospect of greater cooperation between two regional players. Iran has a very productive relationship with Turkiye, and obviously, it exhibits immense amount of influence in Iraq with the Shia clerics as well. So they would look at this with cautious optimism because they would want to make sure that, one front as far as proxy warfare with Israel actually continues, which also, in some ways also breeds instability within Iraq.
Yes.
And on the other hand, they would also want to make sure that, a counterterrorism, you could say, framework between two regional allies actually materializes so that a more peaceful, productive Middle East can actually come forward. Because the strategic thinking in Iran with the new president, he's extremely sympathetic towards the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. And he basically believes that revenge against Israel is extremely important. Israel is a recurring theme in Iran's strategic thinking at this point in time. But obviously, the other side of the coin is that they would welcome this agreement as,
yes,
it is mutually beneficial for Iraq and Turkey.
All right, gentlemen. Unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.